David Fetter, Executive Editor Technical for the Prepared Foods Network here at BNP Media, and welcoming you to another Prepared Foods dive into strategies in the field of food and beverage product development. Today, we bring you the first in our three-part series on food colorants. In this installment, regular contributor and food scientist Dr. Abby Thiel will present some food science tips on bringing color into one of the more difficult categories, one covering both foods and beverages, dairy. Welcome, Dr. Thiel.
Hi, David. Thank you for having me.
Always a pleasure. Glad you could join us today. When you visited us last summer, we covered the anticipation of the federal mandates to restrict artificial food colorants and replace them with natural colors. Now, in this series, we're going to drill down a little deeper with you, cover how to apply natural colorants to specific categories of formulations, dairy, bakery, and beverage products. And let's go ahead and kick it off with dairy. What are the big challenges here?
Yes, I think this is a great place to start, David, because dairy is one of these tricky types of products when it comes to working with natural colors. Because, I mean, if you think of dairy products, they undergo like every major stress factor at once. And milk and yogurt, they actually have a fairly neutral pH. They're heat treated. They're exposed to a ton of light, starting early on in processing, like all the way through just sitting on the grocery store, in the dairy case. And of course, their shelf life is, usually a couple weeks to even months. So if you have a color that's not stable, it's definitely going to show.
Well, that's an assault from all directions, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay, let's pick it apart one by one. You mentioned neutral pH of dairy. How does that affect the coloring?
Right. So this neutral pH, say like pH 6 or 7, the problem is that a lot of these natural colors, they only behave correctly under more acidic conditions.
Ah,
And anthocyanins are a really perfect example of this because, they give these beautiful reds or purples in like a berry drink at low pH. But if we, have a dairy drink now and they shift more towards this like muddy, almost like bruise like purple, brown, blue color, that's not
ooh.
very appealing. And then they break down after that altogether. So these anthocyanins, they're not like a great match for milk or yogurt. And the same thing with butterfly pea flower extract, by the way. So it's really famous for this like cool color shifting with
Yeah.
pH. But, in dairy, it really imparts this more unstable blue hue that really is not going to hold up over the shelf life. So the solution for these dairy products is that you have to find like a pigment that doesn't react or shift with pH, right? And so
Right, right.
carotenoid derived colorants work really well here. So that's your carotenes, lutein, lycopene. All of these will stay stable at this more neutral pH and really give like nice shades from a bright yellow to a deep strawberry red.
Wow. Could that be because those are lipid soluble and you've got your lipids in dairy and they're just kind of like holding on to those colors better?
Right. So
So,
most dairy products, whether it's milk or yogurt, they have a lipid phase or a oil phase. And so any, pigment that is actually oil soluble has like a nice home to go to and is more
good way to put
easily
it.
incorporated into the product.
Good way to put that. So, okay, let's jump to the heat issue because pasteurization, that's usually
Mhm.
mandatory for dairy. So, how can that be dealt with?
Yes, so as most people probably know who are listening, a dairy, whether it's milk or yogurt or ice cream, they are going through pasteurization, maybe UHT processing, and these are pretty brutal. I mean, they're
Mm,
involving high temperatures and sometimes for even quite long times at those temperatures. And some of these pigments, they're just not going to be able to handle that. So beetroot is a really good example of this. It
mm.
can give like a really gorgeous pink red color, but it's quite heat sensitive and especially it's just not going to work too well in dairy. Um, Unusually like long and gentle heating sometimes surprises people. This is actually worse for beetroot than just like a really intense burst. And so there are cases where something like UHT processing can work, but if you're doing a slower or gentler pasteurization, it can just wipe out the color completely.
Wow.
Yes, and then with varying pH, with the carotenoids and lycopene, these are they're fairly heat stable, let's say, especially if they're in an emulsion, like we were talking about, if they can get into that oil, that lipid
Uh,
phase. So that's where you will see like these carotenes or lycopenes. You could make like a strawberry milk, a banana milk, mango yogurt, and you get all these bright, fruit flavored dairy products. And this like heat stability is a major reason why you see these carotenoid colorants really dominate dairy applications.
well, so yeah, these carotenoids seem to be pretty powerful workhorses. Does their strength cross over to light exposure as well?
So it does, yes. And
Ah.
if you think about how milk is sold, it's a lot of times in like clear or almost translucent bottles. And like we said earlier, it's just sitting in the grocery store under these lights, like retail lights all day. And this is kind of a nightmare for natural colors. Turmeric is a big one here, so it's like a really gorgeous neon yellow in the lab, but it is extremely light sensitive, so like in a clear milk bottle, it's really gonna fade fast. Beet also degrades under light. Chlorophyll is light sensitive too. So when we, want to put a drink in clear packaging, we always have to, think like what pigments could handle that exposure to light. And again, carotenoids do work well here. It's still important you need to support the carotenoid colorants with antioxidants to really keep that oxidation at bay, keep that fading under control. If you're
Mhm.
someone who develops ice cream, well, you have a bit of have a bit easier because at least ice cream, it's frozen, so a lot of these chemical reactions are delayed, and it's packaged in opaque tubs. So ice
Mhm.
cream is a much friendlier category for natural colors.
Yeah, the packaging is, and I've seen some ice creams that they do put in
Hmm.
clear packaging, and that jumps over to what you were talking about, the flavored milks, because
Hmm.
many makers of those will want those in clear packaging because of the bright colors and not want to hide
Absolutely.
the color. They want to attract, the
Yes.
consumer to get those. So what are some other areas of concern for product developers making the shift to natural colorants in dairy products?
Yeah, so I think we have to talk about formulation and oxidation
Mm.
because we mentioned already dairy tends to have some level of fat, and that is going to change how these colorants behave. Because if you have oil-soluble pigments, things like
Ah,
beta carotene, lutein, lycopene, they actually love being in dairy, right? We said they like
oh,
find
that's
a
right.
little
Yeah.
home in the oil phase because they just dissolve so nicely in that oil phase. So if they're emulsified correctly, they should stay stable throughout, processing and storage and the whole shelf life. But oxidation is still the enemy here. So many of these products, when you switch to a natural colorant, you'll also want to use to add an antioxidant, something like tocopherols or ascorbyl palmitate into the product now to protect that pigment. Usually the antioxidant package inside the emulsion is enough to keep like the color looking great through processing and through the whole shelf life.
Hmm. Yeah, so, we're talking about tocopherol. What about the tocotrienol form of vitamin E, which can find in annatto, which is a common
Mhm.
natural colorant? Will that do the same thing? I know it's a much
Yes.
more powerful antioxidant.
No, I think that
So
should do the same thing. And a lot of times it's kind of like it looks very good because now you have also added like a vitamin, right? When you can label your antioxidant
exactly.
and a vitamin. So that kind of can be like a win-win, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. So we're out of time on this one. What message would you like to leave folks with when it comes to natural colorants?
I would say what if you're switching over to natural colorants, don't sort of just throw in. or natural coloring at the end, I would sit down and do your research first, sort of list out like in your product, what are the stressors? Like today we talked about light, about heat, about, these different conditions, and then try to find, a natural pigment that can really stand up to those specific conditions.
Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Beal. It's great having you back with us and providing detailed information for the dairy product makers who are transitioning from artificial to natural colorants. And it really is enlightening, when you think of just what a long chain these things have to go through as dairy products when we're making that shift. I want to thank our audience for joining us as well. Again, I'm David Fetter, executive editor technical for the Prepared Foods Network. We were learning about using natural colors in dairy foods and beverages from Dr. Abby Thiel. She's food scientist and expert in ingredient functionality and food innovation. You can look for the second installment of this series, Natural Colors for Bakery. That's coming out next month. And while you're waiting, tune in to Abby's YouTube show, Abby the Food Scientist. It's a lot of fun, and you can find more of her expertise on colorants and many other topics of interest for food and beverage developers right here at preparedfoods.com. So, till next time.